Dr. Radner, what do Canadians need to know about what's happening with MA.I.D across our country?
Thanks for this huge question, and it's amongst the most important, I think, that any Canadian is facing right now, because it goes to the soul of a nation and to the soul of our communities, and therefore of our own families and of our children and so on. We're talking about the deepest stuff. There's not just one piece of legislation that we might agree with, disagree with, have qualms with here and there. What's at stake is killing people, and the civil society, not just permitting it, but actually legislating means by which people can kill themselves and others can do the killing for them. So this is a society which has now entered into the realm of authorized killing of those who are suffering, period.
But for those who are saying this is a compassionate way to offer and the end of suffering, what would you say about this concept that this is compassion?
Well, I wouldn't deny for a moment the deep emotional pain that people who love somebody they see suffering terribly feel, and that motivates genuinely a desire to see that suffering end. And within that desire, here is an instrument that can happen. So there is compassion involved in the motivation. Yeah. It is not compassion, however, that works in the execution. I use that term in both senses of the word, of fulfilling the project as well as killing somebody. That is not a compassionate act. Ultimately, we have to distinguish the motivation from the act itself. That act crosses a threshold from compassionate motivation to despair. Mm-hmm. Despair in the face of who we are, who God is, and who we are made to be, and what we are called to be in the midst of our own difficulties. So to those who say, I want to be compassionate, the first thing is to say, yes, you do. God bless you. And the second thing is, let's think of what that means in the face of who we are as God's creatures and God as our maker. And self-murder is not one of the options.
Well, what you're touching on here, Dr. Radner, is this concept of, this is not true compassion. Actually, true compassion is taking in the other, taking in whoever needs support, encouraging those who are struggling in society, and in fact, leading mental health advocates as well as those who lead in the areas of advocating for those who have disabilities are very concerned about MA.I.D laws expanding recently to include those who have disabilities, but now could be administered to those who simply have mental health conditions coming this March. Those advocacy groups are very concerned because their concept is that this actually puts at risk the most marginalized people in society who are often struggling the most to really just experience a doing away with, essentially, in society where they're no longer our burden and we're not there to care for one another and care for those who are marginalized and at risk.
Well, we've already had cases, I think, that have been made public where officials of the state, as it were, have actually, if not openly, well, maybe even openly encouraged people, poor people, and others who are, whether difficult medical conditions or mental health conditions, to consider killing themselves because it would make life easier for everybody else. I want to go back to the pain thing. Mm-hmm. We can think, and again, it's easier to think of it being, of compassion for somebody who's just in physical agony. Bring it to an end, because some of us have felt that, if only briefly, mercifully. Maybe longer. We know people, our family members, people we love, have gone through the end stages of pancreatic cancer or something like that, which is tremendously painful. But now we're being told that mental anguish is the same thing. It also is a basis for ending one's life. And I think people rightly, we're going along with it, it seems, although the government put a pause on it precisely because people were uncomfortable with it when the law was passed. The law is passed, but they put a pause on implementing it, right? Because people were uncomfortable with it. So there's this intuitive sense that there are different kinds of pain. Not all pain is equivalent. And we start saying, what is pain in the end? Physiologists, biologists can measure things going on in your brain activity and nerves firing in certain ways, but there are lots of different ways that happens which are uncomfortable. What kinds of pain are legitimate? What kinds of pain are we asked to bear by society to be moral and responsible people? And what kinds of pain are we allowed to make our disappearance from? Nobody has explained any of this. We've got a category called pain. And you better believe it, people feel pain over all kinds of things. And if this category pain is your criterion for self-murder and assisting self-murder, it's all over the place. Yeah. This is a tide. This isn't the slippery slope. This is just the reality of definitions. Mm-hmm. Mental pain being equivalent to physical pain. I'm not saying one is worse or better than the other, but they are different. Mm-hmm. And if we lose the sense of ways pain is different, we also lose the sense of how to deal with pain. Everything becomes impossible.
I'm thankful for your answers and all of the light you are shedding on this topic, especially, as we start to turn into looking at what the Bible has to say about our life and how we live it out as creatures created in God's image. One of the points that you've made in other pieces of writing is that, as those who are created in God's image, followers of Jesus, we need to learn how to be comfortable with suffering. And that's something that is so foreign to our society today. Not only is it very individualistic, where we assume we can just make these autonomous decisions about our life, death, and suffering that don't impact anyone else, when really it does, because we're always living life together. But we don't want to suffer at any cost. What do you think is going on there in terms of why we've come to this place where everything is about self-realization in our society?
So, yeah, you brought up, I mentioned autonomy, and you also brought up this whole question of that it's all private, it's all my decision. And death is impactful for others and so on. And that's a key question about how we understand ourselves as human beings made in God's image. One clue, and it's only one, is that in the image of God, He made them male and female, He made them. The first discussion of the image of God is of two people, not one. We are made for others. You love God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, but you love your neighbor as yourself. The order of our life is fundamentally and primordially with others. It's not alone. And so dying is never alone. This notion that I have the right to my death, I think, is fundamentally false for a Christian. We don't have a right to our life. We're given life without asking it to a mother and a father, whether that's done well or poorly. That's how it is for everybody, even with surrogates and the whole rest of it. That's what a human being is. It comes from two people. But our deaths go to other people too. And I don't know whether this is a good place to bring up some of my own experience or not. But I think this is terribly important to understand, and why the social aspect of this is, it's not just an individual, am I being faithful or not? It's what am I doing with the whole life we share amongst us in the society or in a church. So my mother killed herself when I was a teenager. And I realized, it took me a long time to realize this. I'm 67, I'm still figuring some of this stuff out. Yeah. That probably by the time I was 10, she was already deeply depressed and acting in certain ways that were not life-affirming, let's put it that way, for herself. And she taught those to her children, not on purpose, but just by her struggles. And then finally by her death, and she made some attempts before, were unsuccessful, before she was successful. She taught us something. And I know she'd be aghast to think that she did what she did, but it happened. She taught us that it is possible to think of our lives as worthless at their root. I struggled with that for years. I made an attempt on my own life while I was at university. With stuff that I know I learned. One of my sisters successfully killed herself 10 years later. Stuff she learned. There is no death that doesn't implicate a whole tree of people.
Yeah.
That literally ramifies, has branches.
Yeah.
John Donne famously says, no one gets on an island. And that is true, but it is true for the most negative things as for the most positive things.
Yeah.
Our responsibilities go everywhere. So a big question for Christians and for anybody is, what are we teaching one another when we both allow, let alone participate, let alone choose in the deliberate ending of our lives?
Yeah.
What are we teaching people?
When you think about suffering, Dr. Radner, and I think about your own story, the experience of losing your mom and your sister, the emotional toll that took on you, and you mentioned that even to this day, you're working through some of the issues that you inherited and were taught. You have lived a life where you have suffered as a result of other people's choices, and you continue to live that life. And here you are now, a voice to those who suffer, saying you can be resilient and move through this. Looking at the person of Jesus and the way he suffered on our behalf can really inspire us to be resilient in the face of our own suffering, physical, mental, emotional. Would you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, and I would say that's absolutely right. And I would say even more than inspire Holy Spirit way, in an intimate, vivifying way. But we participate in his suffering. Paul talks about that. Suffering with Jesus. Not necessarily in the sense of we're not redeeming the world, but we are actually allowing our suffering to be an offering that we make into his infinite treasury, which is his own love poured out for all the world and all of humankind, and for us as well. It's kind of a response. And it's a response. How do we express love for someone? We give what's most important to us to them. Mm. And by offering, and I'll stick to that word as the main word I would use in terms of what we do with our suffering as Christians. We offer it. In Christ, we offer it to God. I'm not sugarcoating it at all. Mm-hmm. I hope people realize that. Yeah. But it can be a good gift. Yeah. And it goes so much against the grain of everything we teach people these days.
Dr. Radner, as we move into a season in March, potentially, where MA.I.D laws are opened up for those who have mental health issues, and we look at the increase every year in the last few years, 30% more people apply for MA.I.D and receive it. What do you think the future of our society could look like if we don't start to take action and speak up about this issue?
Where are we heading?
Yeah.
We're partially there. Mm. I fear for my children are young adults. They've had their struggles, by the way. I fear for grandchildren. What are they learning? One of the reasons I decided to talk about any of this, I didn't talk about this at all for my experience until I was, basically 60 years old, except in private here and there. It was hard.
Yeah.
But I made a conscious decision that I am, and it's hard. I also feel I'm betraying memories and privacies that maybe I shouldn't of my family. But I got to the point where I realized I can't not talk about this. We're fighting for the integrity of the human creature in a social, civil space, including in our churches. We have entered that battle. We're at the front end of it. It's going to get worse.
Well, Dr. Radner, I'm so glad that you are able to share your personal story more and more, because there are so many lessons within it. And I know it even comes at a cost to share it. And yet you're sharing a different narrative and a new message to the next generation, that your life has innate intrinsic value, that you are created in God's image. And, for those watching right now who are hearing this message, your life doesn't matter. Go ahead and apply for medical assistance in dying. What would your message be for Canadians watching right now who need to take action and recognize their life has value, but also reach out to one another to make a difference in society at this critical junction in our nation?
People have pointed out the irony of the fact that we fund suicide hotlines to keep people from killing themselves, but we've also passed laws to allow people to kill themselves. So, to those who are in this place personally, whatever that might be, you follow the line and the motives of the suicide hotline. Call one of them. There are people there, okay? Go to a pastor, go to a priest, somebody you trust, and just raise the question. There are a lot of people still, God be praised, who understand the infinite intrinsic value of having been made by God. There are people out there who do. And there are quite a few of them. Even people who are confused about MA.I.D, they understand that when push comes to shove. Go talk to them. You got to find somebody. If you are somebody who can be such a person to somebody else, don't be shy about mouthing the truth. God made us, not we ourselves. And we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Read Psalm 139. Read it over and over again. Well, Psalm 139, one of the great places. And I would say, and this is to anybody who understands that this is not right, we live in a society still where even though laws are made, laws can be changed.
Yes.
Just because a law has been made doesn't mean it's sacrosanct. We know that because other laws, they changed, the sanctions against suicide to now make them possible. They can be changed back. It is possible. And that is why, the political line is not one to be avoided. You write to MPs, you campaign, you express the fact that these are bad laws. I would say they're evil laws. I would say from a Christian perspective, they are blasphemous laws. Every Christian, I believe, has a duty to work to change these laws, not just to minimize them. Okay, for the old people, it's okay, but not for the 12-year-old depressed people. No, it's not okay for anybody. It's all one law. Get it changed. Yeah. And that will take a long time and a lot of work, but laws can be changed. Work at it.